Well, it was 15 years and 1 day ago, 9/11 happened. And I kept kind of, like a moth to a flame, I suppose, throughout the day, just kind of checking the various TV stations to see what was going on. And it seemed like let's remember the people who died. And that's a very reasonable thing. I mean, it's a good human emotion, I think, generally speaking. But there's been no serious conversation about remembering we're talking about the 3,000 people who died here in the United States, roughly, on 9/11, particularly when you include I guess that includes the people in the airplanes. But we're not talking about the at least 300,000 and maybe as many as 1 million people that we killed in response to this, or the 8,000 Americans who have died on the battlefield or peripheral to the battlefield as a consequence of the way that George W. Bush chose to react to this. I mean, just this whole idea that, and I'm curious what you think about that. What was your response to 9/11? I mean, my first response was, well, this is something we should be talking about. This is something, it's an anniversary. It was the 15th anniversary. I mean, even numbers and fives, it's something special about those. And I think we should be remembering 9/11. But there's a great piece that was published originally on Facebook. Stone Kettle reposted it by Jim Wright over at Democratic Underground. Saying 15 years ago today, 19 poopheads attacked America. They killed 3,000 of us, and then America got its revenge. Many times over, we killed them. We killed them all. We killed their families. We killed their wives and their kids and all their neighbors. We killed whole nations that weren't even involved just to make damn sure. We bombed their cities into rubble. We burned down their countries. They killed 3,000 of us. We killed 300,000 of them. 8,000 of us came home in body bags, but we got our revenge. Yes, we did. We're still here. They aren't. We win. USA, 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 right? Except every year on this day, we bathe in the blood of that day yet again. We watch the towers fall over and over again. It's been 15 damn years, but we just can't get enough. And it goes on like that. And sure, we got bin Laden, right? That's what we wanted. That's what our leaders promised us 15 years ago today. And then it gets into this point. It's 15 years later, and we're still afraid. We're still terrorized. We're still wallowing in conspiracy theories and peering suspiciously out of our bunkers at our neighbors. Sure, we won. Sure, we did. We became a nation that tortures our enemies. We torture our own citizens, for that matter, writes Jim Wright over on Facebook, reprinted over here on DU. And he says, we're talking, and now we're even, we're being a nation, we're getting wireless warrant taps, we're getting rendition, we're getting used to being strip searched at our own airports. He says, I've had enough of 9/11. Screw 9/11. I'm not going to watch the show. This is his take on this. He says, I'll remember the dead in my own time, in my own way. We got our revenge many times over for whatever good it did us. Now, that's an interesting take in my mind. It's not specifically mine. I understand the sentiment. Maybe my instinct is to go at these things with a little less emotion and a little more thought, but not to say that that's not thoughtful. Evaluation. Let's look at both sides, kind of thing, which may be a flaw. But it seems to me that we had, between when George Bush and Dick Cheney were elected, I had on this program the guy who was the National Security Advisor, and Shano or Danielle, if you can remember his name. No, he was the head of the Nationals. He was the National Security Advisor. He was followed by Condoleezza Rice. He was the predecessor of Condoleezza Rice. In any case, I had him on this program. And And he said that he had personally briefed Rice, and he had personal knowledge that Al Gore had personally briefed Cheney, and that Bill Clinton had personally briefed George W. Bush in the early weeks of January of 2001, that their biggest threat was going to be Osama bin Laden, that bin Laden was coming to get him. That Richard Clark was running around with his hair on fire. The FBI and the CIA were both on it. Everybody's trying to figure it out. Clinton tried to take out bin Laden a year earlier with the 3 cruise missiles and missed him by 15 to 25 minutes and was ridiculed for doing so on the floor of the House and the Senate because they said he was trying to divert the nation's attention away from the Monica Lewinsky scandal. And, you know, they were told explicitly, in no uncertain terms. And after that telling, what did they do? Basically nothing. I mean, it's like basically nothing. It was Sandy Berger, wasn't his name? Maybe not. In any case, I think it might have been Sandy Berger. And I just checked our chat room to see if Sue knew. But in any case, in fact, I'm quite certain it was Sandy Berger. He was, you know, the whole let's create a scandal around this. You know, he took something out of the National Archives in his pants. In other words, he put it in his pocket. Yeah, it was Sandy Berger. In any case, our response to 9/11 has been, you know, well, back up a little bit. So George W. Bush put Dick Cheney in charge of 2 things right after the inauguration. Right? He says, you got 2 jobs. One of them is to respond to what Sandy Berger and Al Gore and Bill Clinton just told us, that, you know, we got terrorism coming our way. So create a counterterrorism task force. And the second thing is, you and I are both oil executives. There's a pile of oil out there. Let's figure out where it is, how we can get it. Let's create a national energy policy, because there wasn't one. And so Cheney in March convened that national energy policy. He didn't convene the anti-terrorism meeting. This is how much they thought that the Clintons were just being hysterical about the possibility of a 9/11. They completely ignored it until September. The week before 9/11 was the first meeting of Dick Cheney's anti-terrorism council. Did you hear any of that in the news this weekend? They completely ignored that, you know, Richard Clark running around with his hair on fire, all these guys. They got, you know, on August 5th, the presidential daily briefing, the CIA flies a guy all the way down to Texas because George W. Bush is taking the longest vacation in history, and says, bin Laden determined to strike inside the United States, and George Bush literally patted him on the butt and said, or patted him and said, you know, go on your way, you have covered your ass. That was his phrase. And, you know, this, again, I don't think this is conspiracy theory at all. I'm not suggesting that George Bush, you know, was looking forward to this, had anything to do with it, none of that kind of thing. I think that they just weren't taking it seriously. They believed that this was leftover hysteria from leftover Clinton people, and probably ginned up in order to you know, stop the impeachment proceedings or some variation. I mean, you know, the Republicans have an extraordinary way of deluding themselves. You know, to think otherwise is to think that Bush saw this coming and decided that he could use it to his advantage. And that's a pretty grim thought. I'm not quite ready to go there. Although with George W. Bush, there are many times when absolutely nothing would surprise me. But certainly that's what they decided to do once it had happened. The first meeting that Cheney had was in March. And oddly enough, Larry Klayman of Judicial Watch, this group out of Florida that's right now giving Hillary Clinton hell about her internal emails. They're the ones doing all these freedom of information filings. They went after Dick Cheney and his energy task force. And they discovered that these guys, which included executives of oil companies, were getting together in a secret room in the White House with no dissenters, no environmentalists, no green energy people, just a bunch of oil guys or fossil fuel guys. getting together, and they decided Iraq has 10% of the world's oil. We're going to get it. And they divided up the oil fields. They had the maps. They had the lists of all the countries and which companies in each one of those countries they were going to sell how much of which wells to. They decided all this stuff in March and April of 2001. And the documents are out there for you to see. They're easily found. And, you know, we've used them on this show. I've talked about this before. So they were looking for an opportunity to invade Iraq. They in fact, you know, one of the former cabinet secretaries wrote that he was shocked that in the very first cabinet meeting in the fourth week of January, that the first topic that was brought up by George W. Bush was, how do we get to invade Iraq? He really wanted to finish his daddy's war. And I heard no conversation of that. So I think this whole issue about 9/11 has become an almost unhealthy fetish, where we portray ourselves as the victims when in fact we responded with a ferocity that has caused much of the world to think of us as evil. And in a way that actually did not make us safer, but made us far more vulnerable.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And if anything, that's the huge legacy of the Bush administration. It's not just that they lied us into a war with Iraq, but that they showed the world how screwed up we could be.